We're talking with whom?
Darwin Mac McLeod, Mac being my nickname.
Mac, so you grew up where?
I grew up in Lasbuddy area, and my first 3 years in high school was at Spring Lakehurst, and then Mom and Dad moved to Texaco, and I went to Texaco for my senior year.
But now you grew up at Lasbuddy. Did you ever go to Lasbuddy schools?
Yes, ma'am. The first 8 grades of, and I graduated from junior high at Lasbuddy.
Okay. Now we placed you, and so now, how did you get to Alaska?
Well, after high school, I went in the Navy. 4 years in the Navy. I got out in the summer of 1987. And I didn't really have the direction on my life that I should have had as a young man, but I decided, well, I'm going to go to college. So I enrolled at Cisco Junior College, and my roommate had first cousins that were working in the oil field in Alaska. And at semester break from college in 1968, me and my roommate flew to Alaska to make $1 million in the Alaska oil field.
Well, did you ever work in the oil field?
Yes, I actually wound up working 31 years in the oil field.
Really?
And then I started commercial
All in Alaska?
fishing. Yes, all in Alaska.
And then you did commercial fishing?
Yes, in 1976, I got in Alaska in January 68 and started working in the oil field. Then in 76, I got invited by some rig hands that had bought a commercial boat to go take 3 months off from the oil field and go out commercial fishing. Well, that was a drastic mistake because I had a big passion for fishing once I did it. And so within 2 years, I had saved enough money to buy my own boat. And then the guy that I leased my boat out and hired out on my own boat as a deckhand and fished for a man that had his own salmon permit in Cook Inlet. And I fished on my own boat as a deckhand for 2 years, and then I had enough money to buy my own commercial permit. And then so I continued to fish, and then I would, as soon as commercial fishing was over, then I would go back to drilling in the oil field. And
Really?
yeah, back and forth.
Back and forth.
Summer wages and winter wages.
Well, now, were they good wages?
Probably the best of any place in the world.
Really?
Yeah. I really had a good life, you know.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, were you married?
I was married, and I lost my first wife to cancer in 1987. And then I remarried again in 1991, was my second wife. And she was born and raised in Alaska, and we separated, and she's in Farwell, Texas right now.
Oh, my goodness. So now you have done something that no one in Muleshoe has ever done. You had dogs and more dogs. And why did you have these dogs?
Well, I didn't really ever plan a lot of my life. It was just I think the good Lord had me in the right place at the right time because my first day in Alaska, I had like a 4 or 5 layover before I could fly from Anchorage to the Kenai Peninsula. So a cab driver invited me and my roommate if we wanted to go downtown. He said, the fur rendezvous is taking place today. And I said, well,
now, what is that?
That is all of the fur traders, the gold miners. It's a winter festival. And they had fur rendezvous sled dog races.
Uh-huh.
So I went downtown and was freezing to death. And I was in a little Levi jacket that was lined and in Wellington boots, and that was my cold weather gear. And I'm standing beside a man, and he says, "Fella, it looks like you're freezing to death." And I said, "Yes, sir, I am. This is my first day in Alaska."
Well, now, how cold was the temperature?
Probably about 5 or 10 degrees. Just perfect weather for people that's used to the cold. But he sent his daughter, she was a young lady, probably in high school, and he says, "Hun, run to the pickup and get my parka." So she brings the parka back, and he says, "Fella, I'm giving this coat to you."
Oh, my.
I said, "Hey, you don't need to do that." And he says, No, you need better clothing you've got in Alaska." He said, "I'm going to give you a tip." He said, "You learn to play in this and you'll stay in this." And boy, was he ever right. I fell in love.
How many years did you live in Alaska?
I lived there 31 years. Pat and Larry Kirk, that y'all may know here in Muleshoe, they moved back, but they followed me to Alaska. And
Now, how did you know them?
well, that's my brother-in-law and sister.
Oh, okay.
And Pat's living here now in Muleshoe on K Street. And my brother-in-law, Larry Kirk, passed away 2 years back. And then in 71, my younger brother followed me up, and he's still in Alaska.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And what's his name?
William McLeod.
Okay. And so now back to the dogs.
Okay, well, that was my first taste that first day. And of course, I knew nothing about dogs. But then that was true with everything in Alaska. So the next several years, everything I was involved with was all a learning process. But it turned out really well for me. I just fell in love with Alaska. In love of Alaska, I would like to tell you this one thing. 92% of the people that go to Alaska never return. And nobody goes there really able in understanding the cold except just a small percentage of people. But it'll capture your heart with its beauty and with the abundance of recreation that you're not accustomed to. The wages, doing anything in Alaska. It's the first time I ever heard the term summer wages. But everything was transforming at that time on the work scene. There were being ice roads built all over the state to take oil field rigs into the remote country. Instead of everything having to be done in the early years, it was always summer wages. We got to get this done. They would frame up construction, and then they would finish the inside in the wintertime.
Now, were summer wages or winter wages better?
Both were real good.
Oh, really?
And once you made the transition, it depended on your trade. But the oil field, because of environmental issues, they was making the transition when I got there to go from summer to winter. Because you actually had more winter time and your ice roads would melt away and you would not be leaving the destruction that miners and other trades had left.
Yeah. Now, let's get back to the dogs.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have dogs growing up?
Just a puppy. Dad always had a border collie for us kids to play with, and we had outside kitties, and but we always had a dog. And when I first got involved with Alaska sled dogs, it was just interest by watching other people. About my third or fourth year, I started, if I knew there was a dog race when I was on my week off from the oil field, then we would drive to Anchorage or Fairbanks just to watch it as a spectator. And then I began taking care of my wife, and I actually took off 86 and 87. I took off to nurse my wife with cancer.
What was her name?
Patricia Marie. Beautiful name. I would put her in the dog sled with me. Dean Osmar had won the '84 Iditarod race, and I'd worked with Dean in the oil field. But Dean come to me and he says, "Are you not working?" And I said, "No, my wife's sick. I'm taking care of her." He said, "Well, if I give you two good leaders, would you train a puppy team?"
Now, what is a leader?
That's your lead dogs, and they know your G-haw commands, left, right. On by means you pass on by. You have just a few basic commands for your sled dogs.
And what were their names that you worked with first?
My sled dogs? Well, I can name them all. I imagine Friska, Buddy, they were my leaders. Tippy, Lopez. Dean Osmar had named a litter of puppies after boxers, and he had one named after Little Red Lopez. And I wound up with Lopez. He had stripped his groin out when he was a young dog, and he had sat idle for 2 years. And so I started picking up injured dogs. I found out this is a source for quality dogs.
Really?
And because you couldn't go and get anybody's best dog, so you had to take a chance on an injured dog. I found a little dog female named Stripe, a little black and white dog, about a 40-pound dog. She had had a compound fracture on her leg, and her leg had been healed, and so I got her. I picked up a dog named Anchor that had had a stripped out groin, and he wound up making the team. And then just putting good dogs that had been hurt but had set out and not ran for a year or two. And I found out this is the avenue to quality dogs to build a good team. And yeah, not every dog turned out, but it was a source to get quality dogs.
So, what was the first race that you participated in?
First race that I participated in, of course, you have to understand, I had a Dean Osmer, and he's won the major race in '84. He's won the whole works, and he's been mushing for several years, and he's helping me.
What does mushing mean?
That is, well, it's mushing is when you're traveling with the team.
Okay.
That's what it's called, dog mushing. Okay. And anyway, so I entered the Tustamina 200 in '87. And
how did you do?
I won it.
You won it. Now, do we have a picture of that?
Yes, ma'am. We got one here somewhere.
Is this it?
Well, I've got an article on it, and then this picture right here would be the trophy and everything of me winning that race.
Now, just go on and tell us about it. How much did you win?
That was a small race, probably about 15 mushers involved, but it was also a qualifying race to qualify me to run a major race like the Iditarod, and that was my intent. I think first place in that particular race, I think, was $600.
Well, now, what about this dog?
That's my leader right there. And that's the same dog in that picture. This little dog right here later would be my Iditarod leader, Friska. I leased Friska out the years that I didn't race to other mushers, and she is in Bart Richards' veterinarian shop in Kenai, Alaska, and she is on 3 different teams in the veterinarian's office. Great little leader.
Well, now, how long do dogs last?
Rule of thumb, the real competitive teams have a history at the time that I was mushing of lasting 3 to 4 years at their very peak. Now, there's a few dogs, exception to that. There was a veterinarian out of Wyoming that raced probably 15 Iditarods. I can't recall his name right now. But he had a leader named Gladstone. And Gladstone completed 10 Iditarods. He run his first one at 2 and his last one at 12. But that's
very unusual.
Very unusual.
And now, how long did these dogs last living?
The average sled dog probably lives 12 to 13 years, but only competitive, really competitive through about a 5-year period.
Now, tell us about some of the things you have laid out here.
This is the official finisher of the Yukon Quest. In 1990, I won it. It was the second major race. It's Fairbanks to Whitehorse 1 year, and the following year it's Whitehorse back to Fairbanks. It's known as the most competitive race, next long distance, next to the Iditarod.
Now, what about this picture?
This is my Yukon Quest team. We finished 7th on that race. This is my 7th place medallion. I'm sorry. This is my original 88 bib on the Iditarod.
So you finally got to race in the Iditarod.
The Iditarod, the Yukon Quest, Tussamina 200, Susitna 300, Summit Challenge, Cache Creek Classic. There's one more, I can't think of it now. But yeah, I raced a lot.
And how many races do you think you were in?
Let's see, let me think. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8.
8. And for a Les Buddy boy, something.
Well, Alaska's got just a different way of life.
Now, what about this over here? What is this newspaper?
Oh, this is the 90 Yukon Quest right here, an issue. And this has got different mushers in here. It's got pictures of me.
Well, now, can we see the pictures?
Sure.
Is this you in the picture?
Yes, ma'am. This is me on my 36-hour layover. You're required on the major 1,000-mile races. You're required on the Yukon Quest to have a 36-hour mandatory layover at the halfway point, and on the Iditarod, you're required to have a 24-hour layover.
And now tell me, how long is the race?
The Quest, Yukon Quest, is 1,020 miles, and Iditarod is 1,120 miles.
And do they go from one place to another always?
The Iditarod always starts in Anchorage if the weather allows it. There's been 2 of the races where they've had to transfer to Fairbanks. The Iditarod has a northern route. It goes through the oil field town of Iditarod. It's a ghost town now. After the gold rush days of at the turn of the century, the towns through there that the Iditarod go through are all ghost towns now.
And where do you live today?
Right now I'm living in Muleshoe, Texas.
My goodness. And now this is a picture from what paper?
Okay, this is the Fairbanks Daily Miner, and it's a picture of me arriving into Dawson City to take my mandatory 36 hours. And
You look cold.
well, yeah, it was pretty cold, but you got to look through the eyes and see the grin on my face.
Now, tell me, what kind of dogs do you usually use?
At the turn of the century, during the gold rush days, dogs were being imported to Alaska as pack animals or even sled dog in the wintertime to move the gold digging equipment and stuff. And history has it that dogs were stolen all over the lower 48 and put on barges at Seattle and sent to Alaska for working, packing gold mining equipment and food and stuff to go into the deal. So quite different than what a person might imagine. Most sled dogs are a multi-breed. The basic husky design, as you might visualize a sled dog, yes, that's true. A lot of them are. But they are, rule of thumb, much smaller. Through the history of racing, you find out that the larger dogs tear their feet up on the ice and the snow. And so dogs have downsized as the faster and that racing has become, the breeding of dogs has downsized quite a lot. Your ultimate structured dog is around 40 to 45 pounds.
So, how long does it usually take someone to win this Iditarod?
The first Iditarod started in 1973, and it took 20 days to run it.
And how many times out?
Well, you just start at Anchorage and finish at Nome.
No, what I mean is, how many breaks do you get?
Oh, the checkpoints, there's 22 checkpoints in Iditarod, and it's a 1,120-mile race. The longest checkpoint is from Caltag coming off the Yukon River going through the mountains over to Uliclick. That's a 90-mile run, but most of your checkpoints they can be as short as 20 miles, usually probably averaging about 35 or 40 miles.
Now, what about, do you have some signatures here? And what is this?
The Iditarod sends things to promote the race. It's a mandatory item. They also have a package. See, the original diphtheria outburst at the turn of the century was the start of the Iditarod mushing the serum over by sled dogs to save the people in Nome from the diphtheria.
Oh, my goodness.
And how that started is they had no other means. The planes and things weren't sufficient at that time. They did have telegraphs to telegraph to Nome and maybe other places along the trail. So the mushers and plenty of dogs were in that part of the country at the time due to the gold boom. And so what they did, they telegraphed ahead, and there were mushers that would open up the trail because it may be closed each snowstorm. Yes. Or wind norther would close the trail. So it had to be consistently opened during the winter travel. Well, they or telegraphed ahead of time, and so there were mushers out immediately working to open up a trail all the way from Anchorage to Nome. And then there were mushers set up to relay. You took your team to you made the first leg, and then there was another musher making the second leg. And I don't know, it could be found on the internet, the history of the diphtheria run. But that's how the ghost town of Iditarod started, and that's how the racing name got it started.
Isn't that something?
Yes, ma'am.
And so now tell me about what time did it take you to run the Iditarod? Now, did you run it just one time?
Yes, ma'am. Only one time. I still want to run it to this day. But I'm blessed to get it one time and then to follow it with the Yukon Quest, plus the other races. But my time was 14 days.
14 days.
And at that time that my 14-day race, that had busted all the previous winning records. But it was progressing all the way down. It started, the first winter was at 20 days, the second winter was at 16, and then I'm running, like, it started in 73, and I'm running 88, and I'm placing 22nd with a 14-day race. But there was a musher from Dawson City in Canada, Larry Cowboy Smith, and he was a miner. He had a bush plane flying in. He had pack horses, pack dogs, and when he had actually started racing in Canada. And his boast to fame, he was one of the early well-known mushers on the Iditarod Trail, and he would make statements like, "Give me below zero weather and I'll show you how to get to Nome in 10 days. Well, Cowboy's highest finish ever was second, but he finally made a 10-day race. And I actually got to run with Larry on the Yukon Quest in 1990.
Now, do you get attached to these dogs?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Do you get to pet them and love them? And
You do, yeah. You got to be really strict on their demeanor. You can't let them just do as they want. Dean Osmar pretty well led me into learning to mush properly. He said, don't talk to your dogs.
Really?
Until you stop.
Oh.
And I would dice up packages of weenies, and when I'd go on practice runs, the minute I set that ice hook and started walking down through my dogs, they was up, their tails were wagging, they was waiting on that little piece of weenie.
Now, what is an ice hook?
Ice hook is it's a claw hook that when you stop, you got to stomp it into the ice or the snow, and it'll hold your team from going. And it works best to catch a small spruce tree and hook it around it.
Yeah, I understand that.
The disaster can really happen if you stop your dog team. There's a rule: you never walk behind it. These dogs want to run, and if they're not really tired and they find out that they're not going to get a treat, they're ready to go again. So you better be where you can grab them and hold them.
Now, what is this right down here in front of us? The certificate.
Okay, this is the official completion of, I think it's a Yukon Quest. Okay.
Okay. And what is the buckle?
This is a belt buckle as official Iditarod finisher.
My goodness.
Huh.
Is there anything else that you want to tell us about on the table?
Oh, well, I want to thank you for giving me this chance. I'm hoping that people will enjoy this, and
I find it most interesting.
but you could look at any of my magazines, and I would like for they are the math, or he's is it the math teacher here in town? That's he's been watching the Iditarod race now for 5 years, and he's I met him here in the library. I come to the library every day to get on the internet to see what the race is doing. You know.
Now, is it running right now?
It is.
It is.
And
when did it start?
It usually starts the first week of March.
I see.
And they come up with this specific time when they started the race. I didn't want to make it too late where it was starting to melt and you had to cross over frozen rivers.
Sure.
Well, so March has always been the start of the Iditarod, and the Yukon Quest usually starts at the middle of February. And the two races, they put them as close together as they could because they didn't want mushers running the Yukon Quest and then jumping over with the same dogs to run the Iditarod. That puts a dog race at 2,300 miles for both races together. But there was a musher, Lance Mackey, that won 4 Yukon Quests in a row and followed and won 4 Iditarods in a row. And they had Nome Sweepstakes, was a 500-mile race at the end of the Iditarod, just a few days after the Iditarod. And people had criticized Lance Mackey. He was a cancer survivor. He was on chemo. He had braces on his knees. He was crawling to his dog teams to put booties on them, and he's winning the races. He won. But anyway, he runs his 9th race, and it was the 500-mile Nome Sweepstakes. It's $100,000, and the winner takes all. And he leads the race all the way back to where it comes in on the Iditarod Trail at safety, and he's got 18 miles to win the race, and he gets caught by Mitch Seavey and Jeff King. So he loses $100,000. And when they interview him at the end of the race, he said, well, the critics have been right, finally. They said that you can't run the Quest and the Iditarod with the same set of dogs and win them both. And he said, what they've been saying about me has finally come true. He said, I run my dogs 18 miles too far this year. At the time I was running the Yukon Quest, you could only start with 12 dogs, and it was mandatory you had to finish with 8. They were really strict. You also had to run with one sled the whole distance. You could change sled runners, but you had to start with whatever you wanted to start with, but no more than 12, and finish with 8, or you would be automatically disqualified. The Quest started after the Iditarod, so they made the rules and the dog care rules a lot tougher. The Iditarod had worked to the point of there was even a few people that tried to run more than 16 dogs, but all of the very top racers were always racing 16. And they would just, anytime a dog come up limping, the veterinarians was in every checkpoint studying your dogs. They would give you shots of B12 to keep the stress from your dogs, keep an appetite booster in them. And if you needed any kind of veterinarian help, it was always available in every checkpoint. So the dogs were never mistreated because they had the opportunity to get them out at each checkpoint. But once you drop a dog, you can never replace him. And usually by the time you got to the ice, towards the end of the race, smaller teams were actually faster on glare ice. If there was any kind of wind or anything, the big dog teams couldn't keep pace with the smaller teams. So mushers begin to drop the last 200 and 300 miles, and especially on the coastal ice, well, they would always, usually the average team was finishing with anywhere from 6 to 10 dogs.
And could you carry anything with you?
There's food drops at every checkpoint. You ship your food in by airplane. It has to be set up by 2 weeks before the race starts. You usually set your food drops up as follows. Your number one bag is all personal gear for you, the musher. You have flashlight batteries, chemical hand warmers, and chemical warmers to put inside your boots. You have extra flashlight batteries, extra food for you, extra clothing for you, maybe an extra parker for you. Anything personal for you, your number 2 bag, and you list these bags because you're tired, you're stressed, and you don't want to waste time. So you go to the checkpoint if you're going to stay there for a mandatory 8 or a mandatory 24. You've already shipped in extra food for your dogs. So your number 2 bag is always 2 of 4 is strictly dog food. 3 of 4 can be sled runners, anything pertaining to dog. It'll be dog booties, sled runners.
Now, do they run in these booties?
Booties are almost, depending on the type of frozen ice or crystallized snow. You don't want to. You always put booties on your dog if you're on a terrain that's going to cut their feet.
Oh yes.
So a certain amount of booties is always mandatory. So that's in your number 3 bag. You are always carrying booties in your sled. You're carrying extra flashlight batteries. You're carrying what the Iditarod has labeled. It's a package. It's a fake diphtheria package in remembrance of the diphtheria run with the original Iditarod. So you have mandatory equipment of that. You have to carry an axe. You have to carry snowshoes, and then.
Does this have to be certain poundage?
No.
No.
But mushers got really good at lightening their sleds. Each sled runner that was built by the time I raced, white was your higher temperatures, around 20 to 30 degrees. Then you had yellow, and that would be like down to 0, and then from 0 to -20, you had orange sled runners, and then after 20 below and in extreme cold, you would wear black runners. Now this is just how the race was perfected through time. Everything. There was extra sled shipped in on the Iditarod. Lighter sleds as you needed less dog food to carry from checkpoint to checkpoint. Sleds made for that Pacific area. If you were still on a long run like Eula Creek where you needed more dog food, you would be check into Caltag, change sleds to a bigger sled to go through the mountain run. It was down to a science. They had come up with, did away with the Coleman stoves. Alcohol cookers was efficient. The first ones made were poor boy, and they would, to take a can, they had a roll of toilet paper as a wick, and they would pour alcohol in it and throw a match in it,
Really?
put snow in the pan, and they would have boiling water in 10 minutes. But then the alcohol cookers come out, made, but it was just a steady improvement in the sleds and everything pertaining to the race.
Were you ever scared?
No, not really, because, and especially right now, the race has a GPS tracker on. And you can call for help at any time. It's an automatic disqualification. But you're cared for, your dogs are cared for, and it's, I don't know, it's for the early mushers, sometimes it could be pretty scary. But at the time I raced, it really wasn't. And there was hard obstacles. Probably the toughest obstacle of all the races was going over the American Summit from U.S. into Canada.
Why was that?
I was stopped by the veteran mushers. I was leading a pack of 2 previous winners, and there was 4 of us traveling. And they started blinking their headlights as we approached the summit at the top of the American Summit, and it was leveling out. And they told me, they said, have you been down the backside of the American Summit? And I said, no, it's my first race. They said, well, when we go up about another 1/4 of a mile, if you want to set your ice hook, we'll hold your team if you want to look at it. And I said, well, no, I don't want my dogs to rest. I said, how steep is it? And they said, it's the steepest part of you'll ever see in any dog race. I said, it'll break over the top and you'll go 1/4 of a mile and it'll seem like it's almost straight down. And then you'll level out. And when you drop off the second drop off, it's a 7-mile drop off. And we're going to follow you in 2-minute intervals. If you get in trouble, you've got 2 minutes to get out of the way because we're coming down. I turned my sled over at about 1 mile because I couldn't stay off my wheel dogs. And anytime you're in...
What's a wheel dog?
That's the dogs next to the sled.
Okay.
So you don't lose your dog team. There's no excuse. You can't do it. Just no matter what, you hold on. So I rolled my sled knowing that it was going to slow me down and keep me from running over my dogs. My sled rolled several times and just rolled me out. It wound my left arm and my drag brake, a chain with a snow machine strap that I stood on. But I lost my headlamp, but I had extras inside my sled bag. So when everybody goes hoorah as they go by me, I'm digging me out a new headlamp to follow them on the rest of the way.
Oh, well, this has been most interesting, Mac McLeod, and he is from Last Buddy originally, but lives right here in Muleshoe today.